Yeah, done, boss. Good.
Okay. Badram karnebihi shruniyama devaha badram pashyema akshabihi ryajatraha sthirairangair tushtuvam sastanubihi vyashema devahitan yadayuhu swasti nah indro vridrashravaha swasti nah pusha vishwavedaha swasti nah tarksho arishtanemihi swasti no bruhaspatir dadatu यो अन्तः प्रविश्य मम वाच इमां प्रक्षुप्तां सञ्जीवयति अखिलशक्तिधरस्वदाम्ना अन्यांश्च हस्तचरणश्रवणत्वगादीन् प्राणान् नमो भगवते पुरुषाय तुभ्यं लसतु श्रीमद् आनन्दतीर्थेन्दुर्नो हृदम्बरे यद्वचश्चन्द्रिका स्वान्तसन्तापं विनिकृन्तति पदवाक्य प्रमाणज्ञान प्रणम्य शिरसा गुरून् व्याकरिष्ये यथा भूतं विष्णु तत्व विनिर्णयम्. So good evening everyone. So we are making pravesha to an excellent aspect of Chandogya Upanishad chapter 6. Today is the sixth session of the sixth chapter of Chandogya Upanishad. So we are in a very interesting phase. So over the last 5 sessions, we have dealt with some basic concepts of the language of the Upanishad, the language of Uddalaka. Yeah. So one of the key messages that we have to understand, and this is very important, and I can't stress enough, is the language of Upanishads is at various levels. Yeah. One can look at it in a very superficial sense and get some interesting facts about it. But as you know, Upanishads is part of the Vedas. Vedas are also called Chandas. What does the etymology of Chandas? Chadayanti iti Chandamsi. So we have to break it open. So every word in the Upanishad, including in chapter 6, has to be broken. You have to break it open to see the inner meaning of it. That is where the philosophy is. The philosophy is in the detail, not in the superficial meanings. As one of the gurus says, Vedas are like sugar cane. The more you chew, the more you work on it, the more sweetness you get. Vedas are like the ocean. You can skimmer on the surface, still it is beautiful. But the more deeper you go into the ocean, then you get all the emeralds and rubies and precious stones and whatnot. Yeah. So that is what we should attempt when we look at the Upanishads and the Vedas. So there's a note of caution here as to how the language of the Upanishads needs to be approached. Many of us would have seen a lot of transliterations of the Upanishads, and sometimes when I look and read and see those transliterations that are available, I feel very sad. Like, how can folks give such a superficial meaning of the Upanishads, and how can they forget the deeper philosophies that is hidden in that? And the reason why that is the case is the only way in which we can understand the language of the Upanishads is with the Guru Sishya Parampara, as to how the teachers teach, how the ancient teachers teach the Upanishads. We got to understand in the same sequence and try to disperse that knowledge to others, and then those folks can then disperse the knowledge to others. So the guru becomes very, 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 very important. And I think in one of the messages, Pratibha Achar had today mentioned that today is Hayagriva Jayanti. Yeah. So that Hayagriva Nama Paramatma is our original guru. He is the original guru who has actually given this to Chaturmukha Brahma. And from Chaturmukha Brahma, it has come down to various lineages from generations to generations to us today. Yeah. So that understanding of the language of the Upanishad is very important. So in that spirit, what have we done so far? So I've just taken a brief overview of each khanda that we have done. So in the first Kanda, we spent a lot of time talking about how this Shvetaketu, Uddalaka's son, went around like an errand, and then he comes back to, after having got 12 years of education in Gurukula, he comes back and he's full of ego. So one of the key messages of that particular Kanda of chapter 6 is Sarvan Vedan Aditya Mahamana Anuchanamani Stabdayeyaya. And this is our situation. Not only us, we have gone to the university for 12 years. And then what have we become? We've become so engrossed in the material world, and now we think we know everything. So will our children be. They all go to the modern universities. They think this is what knowledge is all about, and they carry on with their mundane material existence. And the ego that sets in, having gone to the university education, having endless degrees attached to your name, and then suddenly you feel you are a learned person. Uddalaka is pricking us there, saying that, why do you want to do that? And then he asks, you are going about in this material world, but have you asked those deep questions? What are those deep questions? Ena ashrutam shrutam bhavati amatam matam avijnatam vijnatam iti. So that is where Uddalaka is taking us. It's all well and good having material knowledge of whatever we do in our lives, in our material world. That is all well and good, but that still remains an aparavidya. It is not paravidya. Are we making effort to make progress towards understanding the paravidya, or the supreme knowledge, or the knowledge that will ultimately give us the solution for all our problems, not the material knowledge? And that is where the discourse or the philosophy of the Upanishads of Uddalaka actually starts in chapter 6. And we have seen again how Uddalaka, in every philosophy that he wants to convey, he uses an example of material world. Okay, and this again is a beauty of our Shastras, a beauty of Sanatana Dharma. How do you explain or convey some subtle philosophies? By using common examples, okay, or metaphors, or similes, or illustrations. So those are all the approaches of our rishis of the ancient times to try and teach us some subtle philosophies. So what did Uddalaka do in the first Kanda? He gave examples of a clod of clay, a nugget of gold, a nail cutter, and he illustrated the fact that the most important thing to know in this world is Paravidya, or the supreme being. Okay, when you know that supreme being, then it is as good as knowing everything else, for two reasons. One, maybe we are similar to him. Number two, he is the preeminent Vastu, so we are all dependent on him. He is the most important thing to be known, and we are just subordinate things to be known. So from that aspect, we can understand that the most important thing to know is the knowledge of the Supreme. So that was the essence for the first Kanda. Now, to convey that point as to why that person is the Supreme Being is the most important being, he gave us some key evidence. Sadeva somya idamagra asid ekameva advitya. He is the preeminent and the most important and independent being, because even before creation, he is the first thing, he was the only thing that existed independently pre-creation. Okay, from that we can understand that he is an independent supreme being. And then he went on to describe Tat Tejo Asrujata, Tad Apo Asrujata, Tad Annam Asrujanta. So then Uddalaka took us through pre-creation, and then he goes through this sequence of creation, and then he shows how this Chaturmukha Brahma, Shri Tattva, Mukhya Prana or Vayu, and Shiva. So these are the three important deities or devatas that come during creation. Tejas, Ap, and Annam. Yeah. And these three divinities, under the control of the Supreme Being, make the whole of creation come into being. So that is the view of Uddalaka, and that is the view of the Upanishads. That is also the view of the Veda, Vedanta, whatever you want to call it. So then Uddalaka takes us in the third Kanda. He tells us how this process comes about. Tesham kalvesham bhutanam trinieva bijani bhavanti. Very important statement. So trini eva bijani bhavanti, for whom? For all the bhutas. What are the bhutas? Jiva jatas, and also everything else in the material world. The panchabhutas, if you want to include, you can include all the jiva ganas, bhuta ganas, deva ganas. Everything is bhutanam. They all come from who? Trini eva bijani bhavanti. Who are these three? Tejas, Aap, and Annam. And then he goes on to describe this section in third Kanda, which is very, very complex. And you need to think about it quite a lot because it goes Trivrit, Trivrit, and there is a lot of Trivrit word that appears there. What is Trivritam? Trivritam. Basically, Trivritam, Trivritam essentially means a mixing up of this. So I've got a figure here. If you think this person is Brahman here, and these entities are Tejas, Aap, and Annam. And what this Brahman does is mixing these things, these entities, these three entities mix with each other under the direction of the Supreme. And they mix in various proportions to come up with various components of the universe. And this makes perfect scientific sense. Now we know that all those things around Big Bang, what happened after Big Bang, and how there were three fermions. Those of you who are interested in this, we've dealt with this at some point. The three fundamental particles are said to be fermions, and our elementary particle physics fellows tell us that there are three types of fermions, and these three fermions mix with each other. They form various types of quarks and subquarks. Quarks then mix with each other, then various subatomic particles come into being, and these subatomic particles mix with each other, then various atoms come into being, and all these atoms mix with each other, then all the grosser elements of the universe come into being. Yeah. So you can see the similarity of thought process, both from an elementary particle physics perspective, but also from a perspective of our rishis as to how they have seen how the creation comes about in deep contemplation. This is intuitive knowledge of the rishis from which they have kind of come to the conclusion that this is how this Brahmanda has come into being, of mixing up of three and three mixing up with each other. And interestingly, that is what the elementary particle physics also tells us, that there are only three types of fermions that mix in various proportions. And I hope you find that interesting. So that was the message of the third Kanda. Okay. Then in the fourth Kanda, what happened was, again, we dealt with this in last week. So yes, it is all well and good talking about theoretical physics, but what is practical physics here? What is it that I can understand when I walk out of my house, either during daytime or at night? When I walk out of the house, how can I understand that these three components, Tejas, Aap, and Annam, are actually there in every component of Brahmanda? Okay, so what has our Uddalaka done? He takes beautiful examples. These are not some very complex examples. These are basic examples that we see every day in our lives. When you go to the kitchen and turn on the hob, you get fire. When you go out, you see the sun. In the evening, you see the moon. Yesterday, I was in London driving around at night time at 9:30, and we saw the moon yesterday night. I don't know how many of you saw that moon last night. It was so beautiful to see that moon in the low horizon. Yeah. So the moon. And then of course, Britain is full of, always it's cloudy and always it rains, and there is always some lightning or thunder happening somewhere. Yeah. So our Uddalaka is taking the same examples: fire, sun, moon, and Vidyut or lightning. And he says, look, when you see these colors, white, red, dark colors, understand this is a form of upasana for us. Understand that the redness, the red aspect of the flame or the sun or the moon or the lightning represents Tejas, which could either be Lakshmi or Chaturmukha. The bright aspect of what you see or the white aspect of what you see in the fire, the sun, the moon, and the lightning, consider that and do upasana, that is the aspect of sattvam or aap. And when you see the dark aspects in the flame, the blue, the violet, the indigo, and similar kind of stuff you see in the sun or the moon or the lightning, consider, understand that it is the Shiva or the Rudra who is there, who along with Chaturmukha and Mukhya Prana mixing up with each other is bringing about this beautiful Brahmanda out there under the control of the Supreme. So that was the key message of the fourth Kanda as to how we can go out and then worship these supreme divinities. That does not mean this is nature worship. Okay, what our philosophers, our rishis are saying is, when you go and worship the sun, you worship the sun with all the divinities in it. You are actually worshiping the divinities in it. And we have done that in our Gayatri sessions, as to you don't just worship the material sun, you don't just worship the Surya Devata, you don't worship just the Prana Narayana, but you worship the Agni Narayana, who is the Surya Narayana, who is there, who is the innermost Antaryamin, who is there in the sun, who makes the sun do its job. Okay, so when we go and worship fire, when you throw things in the fire, or when you do your Sandhya Vandana in front of the sun, or you do your Chandra Upasana, or when you admire the Vidyut and you worship the greatness of the Supreme, it is from that perspective. So our rishis were not nature worshippers. Our rishis worship nature with an underlying divinity inside it, controlling and making this wondrous universe. Yeah, so that is the key message that Uddalaka is actually giving us in the fourth Kanda, talking about the Brahmanda. So at this point, you might ask, it's all well and good talking about Brahmanda. How does it matter? What about my own self? What about my body? How can I take these concepts and think about it every day of my life? Okay, that is what today's class and hopefully for the next few sessions we are going to be talking about. So look at the beauty of Uddalaka. He started off saying that you have so much ignorance, you think you are so egoistic and you think you are the greatest person, but he is actually now giving us an illustration as to how our role in this universe is actually nothing. We have not contributed to anything in this universe. Okay? And he was using several approaches here to try and bring home the truth as to how we are nobody in this universe. And that is something that we don't understand in our daily life. And Uddalaka is now slowly pulling us in the direction. How? So first he takes Brahmanda, where you have no role. Now look at your Pindanda, man. Even in your Pindanda, you have no control over your body. You think you may have control over your body, but actually you're not doing anything. So that is what he is going to talk about. So we saw this very briefly last time as to what is the creation of souls mean. Creation of souls is the souls covered by material body is their creation, because souls, as you know, are uncreated. So Uddalaka finished the fourth Khanda by saying, Yatatu kalu somya imaha tisro devataha purusham prapya trivrit trivrit ekaika bhavati tanme vijanahi iti. So Purusham there means humans. Okay, I just want to pick up this. Why he said Purusham? Because last week we said in Sanatana Dharma, in the Hindu view of life, every living being has a jiva in it, not just humans. There are other schools, there are other religions and philosophies which believe that humans alone have souls, whereas your ordinary dog, cat, cow, pigs, and they and other animals do not actually have a soul, so they can be used for slaughtering and eating. Yeah, it is only the humans who have souls, so we don't kill each other, is the view. But the Hindu view is quite universal. For us, every living being has a soul in it. Okay, but not all living beings are called Purushaha. Okay, humans are called Purushaha, whereas non-humans, if you look at the Upanishads, they will be called as Pashus. Yeah, Pashu in one sense in Upanishad language means animals. Okay, whereas Purushaha means humans. So why does he take humans as the example and illustrates what happens in Pindanda. So does anybody want to take up that view? Why did Uddalaka take a human to explain the role of Tejas of Annam in the Pindanda? He could have taken, for example, a cow, which is a very sacred animal for the Hindus. So who want to take this up? This is a very, very brief chat to wake us all up.
Is it because we have discrimination power, Madhuji?
Thank you,
Like
Shilaji.
Viveka.
Excellent. Yeah,
Thank you.
excellent. Thank you, Shilaji. Yes, absolutely right. So, a human form of life is the most evolved. Yeah, so we are the most evolved species, at least on Earth. Yeah, we are the most evolved species. As Shilaji mentioned, we have the power of discrimination. Our buddhi, our manas and buddhi is more evolved. I won't say the same thing for our other five indriyas. There are lots more other animals which have sharper vision than us or sharper hearing than us, but our buddhi and manas are much more evolved. Okay, so that is why we are more evolved, and that is why we call Purushaha. And again, that Purushaha becomes important. Purusha means not just male. In Vedic parlance, Purusha means both male and female. What is the etymology of Purusha? Purushete iti Purusha. That is Jiva inside a body. That which is inside the body is a Purusha. We are inside this highly evolved body, yeah, which has got high discriminative power and so on. So we are all called Purusha. So Uddalaka then immediately says, in Purusha, even in our body, this is how it is happening. Like how in Brahmanda, Tejas Apannam under the control of the Supreme is operating. Similarly, in our body, this Tejas Apannam, that is Lakshmi, Chaturmukha, Mukhya Prana, and Shiva, and by definition, their consorts, they are also there in this body controlling you, yeah, and making things happening. Tanme vijanehi iti. So now I shall explain to you how this Brahma Pindanda operates. So he describes that in three khandas, Panchamaha, Shashtaha, Saptama. In three khandas, these are small khandas, but of course, in Uddalaka's language, these are big philosophies and physiologies that we need to think about and contemplate. Okay, so first let's see how the time evolves. I think my aim is to complete these three khandas and also start some kind of an entrance into the Ashtama Khanda. Okay, so let's go to the first khanda. So let's look at this. So what does he say? Annam ashitam treda vidiyate tasya yah stavishto dhatuhu tat purushayam bhavati yo madhyamaha tan mamsam yo anishtaha tan manaha. That is the very first verse. So let's see how he takes this up. So what do we human beings do when in our daily life? We eat, we drink. We eat various things and we drink. So that is what we are doing. So he takes this as an example and see what happens to the Pindanda here. So let's take the first one. It's purely physiological, and most of you would agree with me on what I'm trying to say here, or rather what Uddalaka is trying to say here. So annam, as you know, is food, not just rice. Anything that we eat is called annam. Annam ashitam means you eat. Ashanaya means, ashana means to eat. So ashitam, to eat. Treda, three. Vidiyate. So what he said is, the food you eat and goes into your body, it becomes three aspects, or it has three aspects when it makes pravesha into your body. Yaha stavishto dhatuhu. Okay, what are those? Avishtaha dhatuhu tat purushayam bhavati. Yo madhyamaha mamsam. Yo anishtaha tan manaha. Okay, let's look at this. So you're putting some food in your mouth, it goes into your digestive tract, and it gets processed over 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, whatever. So Uddalaka says, look, your body needs food for survival. And when you put that food into your body, what happens to your body? And he says, your body processes that food in three aspects. There is the gross aspect of food that you eat, the middle aspect of the food that you eat, and the subtle aspect of the food that you eat. Okay, so we need to think about this a bit more. So one thing I just want to remind you here is, I told Tejas Apannam as those deities. Okay, but when you look at the creation, how the Brahmanda comes into being, when you look at the Panchabhutas, the last aspect is the Tejas Apannam. The last three aspects of the five Panchabhutas is Tejas Apannam. But what our rishis actually say is, the Tejas Apannam of the Panchabhutas actually have got components of Tejas Apannam, of the primordial substances that we discussed about. Okay, so when I eat rice, rice has got a component of solidness, rice has got a component of apa, and rice has got a component of tejas. That is why it is rice. Water has also got the same thing. So you need to think about this as to how that mixing up of these three deities is what brought about the Brahmanda. So that means these three components are there. So that is what Uddalaka is asking you to contemplate. And he says, when you read rice, your body processes it, but it becomes three aspects. Look at, there is three everywhere in the universe. There are three everywhere in the universe, even in what we eat. So what does the gross aspect happens? Gross aspect is what you excrete the next day morning. That is the gross aspect of the food. That is called Purisham. Yeah. The middle aspect of what you eat becomes mamsam. That is, it becomes your flesh. It becomes part of your gross body and it becomes flesh. And then anishtaha, anima means subtle. Yeah. So anishtaha tan manaha. So the subtle aspect of the food that you eat, it goes to the mind. It influences the mind. And it molds your mind, just as how the middle portion gives you the muscle mass and the gross portion is excreted out. The subtle portion goes to the mind and influences this. So he again is telling you, so what does that mean? The subtle portion is tejas, the middle portion is apaha, gross portion is the annaha of the three deities. Okay, Chaturmukha Lakshmi here, Prana here, Shiva here. Is the contemplation there. Okay, so now I want you to think about the subtle aspect of the food. And he says, when you eat, food gets processed in three ways. The subtle probably is the most important in what we do in our daily life. Yeah. Middle, yes, how it helps the body, how it gives you stamina, how it makes you stronger. Those aspects, yes, is interesting. But probably the more important thing for our elevation of consciousness is the subtle aspect of food that we eat. And Uddalaka is giving you these are the three components that your food gets divided into, and this is how it influences your gross body. And understand, because it has got three components, there are these three divinities actually control those three components. So this is an upasana. It is how you contemplate in your pindanda. Okay. Now I want to pause there very briefly because this is a very important concept of the subtle component of food as to how it influences the mind. Because as you know, in chapter 17 of the Gita, in so many verses, Krishna is giving us those kind of lessons as to what you should eat and what you should not eat. What is the tamasic food? What is the rajasic food? And what is the sattvika food? What are the things that you eat that will either elevate your consciousness or put your consciousness down? Why is Krishna is saying all this? Because these are all, as you know, Gita is the essence of the Upanishads. Yeah. And if you take the Chandogya Upanishad, this particular aspect that talks about Annam and how it is separated out, it becomes very, very relevant. So on that note, I have invited three of our friends who are also here today to take up each verse of chapter 17, 8, 9, and 10 and give us a 2 minutes illustration as to how that links up with what Uddalaka has told us so far in the very first verse. So I'm going to invite Neeta, Veena, and Suresh ji, please, to take those verses in order and then give us a brief overview of what Krishna has said in those verses for all our benefit. So over to you, Neeta.
Okay. Thank you, Madhuji. So first one, Shloka 8. Ayus Sat सत्त्वबलारोग्य सुखप्रीतिविवर्धनाः रस्या स्निग्धा स्थिरा हृत्याः आहाराः सात्विकप्रियाः. Okay, so what Sri Krishna is trying to tell us in this shloka is about sattvic food, or what sattvic people or jivas like. So this, he has described how there are 6 things that sattvic food helps us with, or increases. Vivardhana means increases. So 6 things, 6 aspects are ayu, that is life, to live a longer life. Sattva. Sattva is pure, calm, and peaceful mind. And that is what we need to understand or learn all the adhyatma and live a longer life. Bala is strength of the sharira, or strength of the body. Arogya is not having any illness. Sukha is the food that gives you happiness for a long time. Preeti is you're feeling happy when you're actually consuming that food, and it's a satisfying food. So remember the 6 things that sattvic food helps us with. And Madhuji has kindly put it in green, which means it's a green sort of healthy food that I can see. And he has given the list of things that are in there. And at some point, we even discussed, during these lectures, we have even discussed about vegetarianism, etc. And that vegetarian food is sattvic food. Now, again, he's not said this particular food is important, but he's given, Krishna explains the types of food or what the sattvic food should contain. Is it should be rasyaha, it should be juicy, and means has vitamins in it, and snigdha has fat in it. I know we can debate over this fat, whether fat is good or not good, whether ghee is good or not good, etc. But he has clearly said, yes, we do need it in moderation. Sthiraha means it takes time to digest, so you're feeling full for a longer time. And that's, again, ghee is a good example for that, it stays in the stomach. It stays meaning it sort of helps for a longer duration. You're happy, you're satisfied. Hridyaha means it's very, you feel like eating it again. It looks nice, it feels good, and you remember it next day and say, wow, that was fantastic food. It was very, very nice. So these are types, the 4 qualities of sattvic foods that he has described. And the other important thing in this shloka I would like to highlight is, this is the type of food that sattvic jivas like. That's what he mentioned. He doesn't say that these are the sattvic food. So it depends on individuals what they can digest. So if they can digest all these foods, then that is a sattvic food. They're able to digest them properly and be healthy, and it fulfills all those 6 things that I mentioned before. If the foods can contribute to that or increase those things, then that is a sattvic food. Okay, so I hope that we're all following, and we'll try our best to consume all the sattvic foods. So I will stop there and pass it over to Veena ji.
Thank you. Katvam lalavanatyushnatikshnarukshavidahinah ahara rajasaseshtaha dukkha pradaha. Here, katu is bitter, amla, sat, lavana, salty, ushna, hot, tikshna, pungent, ruksha, dry, vidahinaha, burning or chillyful, dukkha, shoka, amaya pradaha, food which would give miseries, agitation of mind and diseases. Aharaha, food articles. Rajasasya ishtaha are liked by the Rajas jivas. Here Bhagwan explains about the food articles liked by Rajas jivas. While anything we consume in the right proportion is sattvic, the same if we consume out of proportion, that becomes rajasic. So in other words, if we add very to the adjectives, it will end up the rajasic food. Thus, the rajasic food is very bitter, very sour, very salty, very hot, very pungent, very dry, very chillful, etc. So this produces ill health, agitation, and despair. Persons in the mode of passion, that are Rajasic jivas, those jivas find such foods very attractive, whereas Sattvic jivas doesn't like these foods. Thank you. And I'll pass on to Suresh for the third Tamasic jivas.
Thank you. Yatayamam gatarasam utiparyushatam chayat ucchishtamapi chamedyam bhojanam tamasapriyam. Here, what Krishna is explaining is that food that's being cooked and has remained for more than 1 yama, 3 hours, or stale food, yatayamam, food that is tasteless, gatarasam, food that is putrid, uti, food that's polluted, paryushitam, that which has been left over, uchishtam, and that which is impure, amedhyam, are the 6 different types of food which are liked by persons in the mode of ignorance. All non-vegetarian food also gets classified under this category. And it's interesting to note that the Sanskrit word for meat is mamsa. And mamsa, as I understand, means that whom I am eating here will eat me in my next life. And this is very clearly illustrated in the Bhagavatam in the context of Prachina Barhi. The essence is that these are the types of food which are liked by people in the mode of tamasa, of ignorance. And these types of food do not contribute to the 6 characteristics that Neetaji just mentioned, which are classified as sattvic foods. Thank you. Back to you, Madhu.
Suresh, Veena, and Neeta, thank you so much for taking us through those verses. So I think that's very relevant here, because I've kind of color-coded this, and I've given you an overview of list of foods. These are not my own creation. I've actually gone into some Ayurveda books and some websites to try and dig those foods that are in these various categories. So I just want to focus on the subtle aspects. Yeah, look at the subtle aspects. As I said, every food that we eat, it has an influence. It has a subtle influence on the mind. So if you decide you want to have sattvic foods, what does it do to your mind? The subtle aspect of the food, it calms your mind. It raises your consciousness. What about Rajasic food? What does it do to your mind? Hyperactivity, restlessness, anger, irritability, sleeplessness. Look at all the items here. I will leave us to reflect on this as to what an amount of Rajasic food that we are doing in our daily lives. Tamasika food, what does it do to the mind? Laziness, dullness, carelessness, unaware of ourselves and others. Alcohol, for example, is a classic example of that. Okay, so the key message I wanted to bring from this slide and from contribution to the friends within the group is to show how Uddalaka is saying whatever we eat, whether it is Sattvika, Rajasa, or Tamasic, the food generally has 3 ways in which it gets processed and 3 divisions of food. Gross is, of course, it goes away. We are not too interested in gross. Middle, yes, it will do something to your gross body in one form or the other. What we should actually take serious note of is what it does to the mind. As Sheilaji mentioned, that it is the mind and the buddhi that the humans are more evolved than animals, and we need to be very wary of how the food that we eat actually influences our mind and our intellect. And that is what this chapter 17 is talking about. And in this context of Chandogya Upanishad, I felt that this is an interesting thing to bring in, but at the same time, also for us to realize how these 3 tattvas, the 3 tejas apannam, are doing that. Yeah. So I noted Pragnesh raising his hands. Pragnesh, do you want to come in here briefly?
Yes, only 1 minute. Thank you very much. This is very interesting topic, close to my heart. through upbringing. Not only these are very nicely classified substances and the ingredients, but also the mindset of the person cooking and the sources from where these have been brought, and the income from this which this has been generated are also very relevant to these three modes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pragnesh. Yes, that's a holistic view of Satvika, Rajas, and Tamasic. Thank you so much for that contribution. So that is about Annam Ashitam Treda Vidiyate Tasya Yah Stavishto Dhatuhu Tat Purushayam Bhavati Yo Madhyamaha Mamsam Yo Anishtam Tan Manaha. Okay. So Uddalaka saying food happens these three things. Have you, yes, it influences you, but what is your role in this? Your role is nothing here. Okay. Look at what happens to apaha. Okay. Apaha pita tisu apaha pitaha treda vidiyante tasam yah stavishto dhatuhu tan mutram bhavati yo madhyamaha tad lohitam yo anishtaha sa pranaha. So this is interesting. So when you have any liquid items in your diet, any liquid that you get into your mouth, what happens to that? Besides the urinary system that Uddalaka is talking about. So what is he saying? The gross aspect of what you drink. It could be these fruit juices. It could be water. It could be anything else. Yeah, the gross aspect of what you drink, it becomes mutram bhavati. Okay, so it becomes the urine. Madhyamaha lohitam. The middle aspect of the liquid that you drink becomes the blood. And then yo anishtaha sa pranaha. Okay. The subtle aspect of what you drink becomes the pranaha, or the vital forces that keep you alive. Okay. So this is interesting. I've taken an example of Mahatma Gandhi, who is fasting for days. So here is a small quiz. Who is this little girl who is sitting next to Gandhi?
Indira Gandhi.
Okay, well done. Yes, so that is Indira Gandhi there. So this is our Mahatma who is fasting, and he has fasted for days on during the freedom struggle. How did he fast? He drank a lot of water. And I picked this Google image to illustrate this, and there is a pot there. He drank a lot of water, but no solids. Okay, he did not eat anything, but he drank a lot of water. That is the only way in which a human being can be alive. Yeah, you can stay without eating for several days, but you cannot stay alive without drinking for several days. Eventually the dehydration will catch up with you. And for those of you who are of medical predisposition, I've taken this thingy about the thresholds of what happens when you don't drink much. Threshold: impaired exercise thermoregulation, thirst begins, other hemoconcentration, reduced urinary output, severe performance decrement, difficulty concentrating, headaches, irritability, sleeplessness, severe impairment of thermoregulation, increased respiratory rate, eventually circulatory failure, renal failure, and your body stops functioning. The vital forces stop and your body stops functioning. Okay, so the reason why I have showed this here is when you drink something, again, Uddalaka is saying, when you drink something, that also becomes three aspects in your body. You don't have any control of this. They just happen in your body. Who do you think make all these happen? There are three aspects that happens in your body, Shvetaketu. The gross aspect of what you drink becomes the urine. The middle aspect of what you drink becomes the blood, and the subtle aspect of what you drink eventually goes and helps with the vital forces that keeps your body alive. Yeah. So pranaha. So then he says tejaha. So as you know, there are three aspects in Brahmanda. So he's bringing three aspects in the Pindanda. Tejo ashitam treda vidiyate tasya yah stavishto dhatuhu tad asti bhavati yo madhyamaha samajja yo anishtaha savak. So this is an interesting verse. Okay, again needs thinking. What is Uddalaka actually telling us, or what is the Vedas actually telling us? Okay, what is Tejaha. So what foods are called tejas? Anybody want to contribute here? People who are familiar with Ayurveda or the Indian system of nutrition or any nutrition want to contribute that tejas or ojas as it's called in Ayurveda. Anybody wants to contribute? Sudarshan, if you are there.
Ojas, well, I don't know what Ojas is. Aushadhi is medicine, isn't it? Aushadhi.
Yeah,
I
Oshadi
think
is
I think the foods that provide increased heat, which will be like ghee or oil, like nuts which have oils in it.
yeah.
Be
Wonderful, Deval.
tejas.
Yeah, thank you very much, Deval. That's the perfect answer there. So anything that has a higher calorific value, anything that produces heat, they are all, and anything that increases your metabolism. Yeah, so they are all considered as tejas. So what Uddalaka is if you eat those kind of foods, tejo ashitam, treda vidiyate. So what happens? The gross aspect of that, asti bhavati. Asti means bones. So they help your bones. So that is the gross aspect. Yo madhyamaha sa majja. Majja means bone marrow. So it says that middle aspect of the high calorific, high metabolic foods that you consume, they help in making the bone marrow, majja. Okay. And then this is interesting. Yo anishtaha savak. Okay, that brightness, that heat, that metabolic activity, the subtle aspect of that is what that controls your walk. Walk means your speech, the way you can talk, the information that you convey through your tongue. So all those things is that aspect of the subtle aspect of the food that controls this walk. Okay, now how can the subtle aspect control your speech? We will come to that in the next slide, but in the next few slides, but I want you to be thinking about this, because Uddalaka is not making this up and then just making a random statement here. He will actually conduct an experiment with his own son and then actually illustrate this point. So if you hold the thought for the next, I think 1 or 2 slides, we will discuss this as to how this all makes sense. Okay, so just to pull you back here, he has said in Brahmanda, in all these 4 things that you see, Surya, Agni, Surya, Chandra, and Vidyut, you have Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas equivalent colors, and when you see that, you have to contemplate, or you can understand that these 3 Tejas, Ap, and Annam are controlling that Brahmanda. And similarly, in your Pindanda, all that you do in your daily life is you eat and drink and you eat various foods. And even those foods that are processed in 3 different ways are also controlled by these 3 deities, Tejas, Ap, and Annam. So you don't have any roles in this, mate. So you are a totally dependent being, is what Uddalaka is telling us. So here, Uddalaka then gives a summary statement. He says, Annamayaha hi somya manaha, apo mayaha pranaha, tejo mai vag iti. That is his conclusion statement. So understand that the subtle aspect of Annamaya is manaha. The subtle aspect of water becomes pranaha. The subtle aspect of tejas becomes vak. So our friend Shvetaketu is a little bit confused and perplexed. He's not quite understanding what is it that Uddalaka is actually explaining. And I think we are also a little bit perplexed. We understood some aspects, but we didn't understand the whole thing that he is telling. Okay, but here are some interesting philosophical facts that I want you to be taking up from today's session, and you do your own research. Mano, Vak, Pranaha. Okay, so for those of you who are familiar with the language of the Upanishad, these 3 words will keep coming in so many Upanishads when rishis talk about it. Mano, Vak, Pranaha. Okay, now look at it in our own Pindanda. Where is Mano, Vak, and Pranaha? Manas is on the head, Pranaha is in the nose, Vak is in the mouth. So they are all in the upper part of your body. Okay, none of this is in the lower part of the body. So this is a very superficial way of looking at it, but that will actually give you the deeper philosophies behind this as to what is it that our rishis are talking about here. So Mano, Vak, Pranaha, for example, can open up in various Adhideva and Adhiyajna interpretations in the Upanishads. For example, Manaha, Manas has got several Abhimani Devatas. There are so many, and it depends on the context in which the Upanishad talks that. So I'll take a different concept here, just to confuse you, I think, slightly different. So in one view, Manas, Rudra is the Abhimani Devata of Manas. Okay. Parvati is the Abhimani Devata of Vak. So what the Manas thinks, the speech or the vocal cords talk. And for these two things to operate, you need to have a living being. You need to have somebody who's breathing. If it's a dead body, Manas doesn't work, Vak doesn't work. So prana should be there. So these three entities are absolutely essential for us to do any activities in life. Now look at it the philosophical sense. Atmava are drashtavyaha shrotavyo mantavyo nitidhyasitavyaha maitreyi. Okay, that nitidhyasitavyaha, for manana, you need all these things. Somebody has to tell you the Veda, then you have to hear that, and it needs to go into your mind, and you need to process this. So these entities, and of course you need to be alive. So these entities are very important. If you take up in this context, in this Upanishad, the Manaha is the Tejas aspect. So that is Chaturmukha Brahma. Chaturmukha and Lakshmi, as you know, I told you, Chaturmukha and Shri Tattva are the Abhimani Devatas of Manas as well. Why? Because Manas has got 5 components, right? So what are the 5 components of Manas? Who is going to tell me that, please? What are the 5 components of the mind?
Manas, Buddhi, Chaitana,
Chitta, yeah.
Chitta.
So I heard, So I heard all those.
Ahankara. Yeah, Ahankara.
Correct. So we captured all the 5: Manas, Buddhi, Ahankara, Chitta, and Chetana. Okay. Chitta, Abhimani Devata of Chitta in Sanatana Dharma is Chaturmukha. Abhimani Devata of Chetana is Lakshmi, Shri Tattva. So these two fellows, Manaha, makes perfect sense. Chaturmukha and Shri Tattva or the Manas. So that is the language of the Upanishads. I hope you find it interesting, because the Abhimani Devata concept is very important, at least for certain schools and certain views of Sanatana Dharma. But that actually explains why we have so many divinities in our system. Yeah, there is one supreme being, of course, but then there are lots of other fellows in our temples and also in our worship. Why? It's because of these things. And once we understand the language of the Upanishads, then going to the temple, why should we have to worship Saraswati, for example? Saraswati is also a Vak Devata. She is also Abhimani Devata of Vak. Why should we worship Saraswati? Why should we worship Lakshmi? Why should we worship Parvati? All those things will make sense. Okay, so without digressing too much, just to pull you back here, Uddalaka's message really here is that even in your body, the various physiological functions that is happening are happening not just spontaneously. And our Vedic views is very different. Nothing can have spontaneous volition. Yeah. So you remember that creation that Shushru did, where Veda Vyasa did a famous sutra called Rachana. It's Rachana na anupapatteshta na anumanam om. So what that means is self-initiated activity is impossible in a non-sentient being. It's only a sentient being that can have self-initiated activity. So all these physiological things that are happening in your body, they're tightly regulated, and they have a sequence of events that happens. They cannot happen spontaneously. There has to be a divinity behind it that controls it. And on top of that, there is the supreme Brahman, who is the overarching master of all that. So that is what Uddalaka is telling us by actually talking about Pindanda. Okay. So like us, Shvetaketu is also a little bit confused. What is that you are saying? Some food becomes subtle aspect and goes up. Something that you drink becomes a subtle aspect and becomes pranaha. And there is something that you eat, tejas, it becomes subtle aspect of vak. What does that mean? So our Uddalaka, as you know, he is a philosopher par excellence. In every concept that he has spoken about, he has always given examples. He will always take a practical example to illustrate a philosophy. So he says, okay, son, don't get confused. He says, look at this example here. That should give you a clue. Daddaha somya madhyamanasya yo animasa urdvaha samudishati tat sarpir bhavati. So what he says is, any liquid that you churn, the subtle aspect of the liquid will actually come upwards. For example, if you take the buttermilk and you churn the buttermilk forcefully, what happens? The butter comes up. That is the subtle portion of the buttermilk. Similarly, Shvetaketu, evameva khalu somya annasya ashyamanasya yo animasa urdvaha samudishati tan mano bhavati. Apaha somya, and then tejasaha somya. So he gives the same, just like how the buttermilk, when you churn, the subtle aspect becomes the butter. Similarly, when the body churns the food that you eat under the guidance of these abhimani devatas, so the subtle aspect of annam becomes manas, subtle aspect of water becomes prana, subtle aspect of tejas becomes vak. Annamayam hi somya manaha, apo mayah pranaha, tejo mai vagiti. Yes. Another example that Uddalaka gives his son. So remember, this is a discourse between a guru and a sishya. And in this situation, the guru is the father and the sishya is the son. And the guru is teaching him these subtle concepts of philosophies using mundane examples. And here he has taken an example of buttermilk. And when you churn the buttermilk, how the butter comes up. Similarly, that is the subtle aspect of the food that happens when what you eat is metabolized, is processed in your body under the influence of these divinities in your body. Okay. So with this, he finishes the Shashtak Kandaha. But then our son Uddalaka is still a little bit confused. He's still, oh yeah, you're saying something about buttermilk and churning and ghee and everything else. And you're saying these divinities are in my body and they are making things like my mind to work for my vak and my prana, and I still don't understand it. Okay. So at this point, our Uddalaka then opens up a new discussion, but a very relevant discussion, which is very important for us. And thankfully, we are all resident experts on this already. Okay. Uddalaka says, okay, you didn't understand that fully. Let me come with another example. I have done experiments with all other things. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an experiment with you. Okay, let's do an experiment with you to illustrate these concepts. So he says, Shodasha Kalaha Somya Purushaha. That is the first part of this verse. Shodasha Kalaha Somya Purushaha. Okay, so here I have put this slide here to illustrate, to remind ourselves. Okay, the jiva is in the middle and it has got these coverings. Jiva doesn't need food. Jiva doesn't need water. Jiva doesn't need food that has tejas in it. Why? Because Jiva is non-material. It doesn't need any of this. So what needs all this? It is the body, right? It is the gross body that needs the Aap, Annam and Tejas. Okay. So our Uddalaka takes his son, his body as an example to do an experiment to illustrate this. Shodasha Kala Shodasha Kala Somya Purushaha. A concept that again comes again and again in Upanishads and again in our discussions over the last year and a half. So I want to break there for a minute and I want to get somebody to illustrate what Shodasha Kala Purushaha is. Possibly I can pick up on Shushrut who did a revision, but anybody can come in and talk about what is the Shodasha Kala Purushaha and how is it relevant in the Sanatana Dharma with all the numerology. Just remind ourselves. Sushrut?
So those are the 15 fences that cover the jivas. They are, I can't, they, yeah.
What happens?
What is that? Sorry. Kham Vayur Jyoti Rapa Prithvi Indriya Mana Annam Indriya Tapo Mana karma loka lokeshu. So those are all the 15 fences that are mentioned in the Shat Prashna Upanishad. So
okay, so thank you, Shushut. I think you got most of it here from Prashna Upanishad. Pranash, sorry, somebody else wanted to come in here?
No, it's fine. I just first few ones, yeah, Shraddham and then.
Shraddha,
yeah. Pranash, so Pranash, Shraddham, Kam, Vayur, Jyotir, Apaha, Prithvi, Indriyam, Manaha, Annam, Annad, Viryam, Tapo, Mantraha, Karma, Loka, Lokeshu cha Namacha. Deval, you raise your hands.
Sorry, it's just a query. I thought Jiva was the 16th and there were 15 fences, or am I
Yeah, you're right. Jiva is 16 and I've just put 15 senses. The 15 is on the outer line. Sorry if it was touching
okay.
the Jiva
Sorry.
there. So it is outer line is 15. Yeah. Starts with the innermost covering of the Jiva in its transaction is Shraddham. Okay. So we got 1 to 15 and it goes in descending order, starting from Pranaha. Pranaha means Jiva. Yeah. So Jiva Abhimani is Prana Tattva. So that is why it's called Prana. Then you have Shraddha. Then it goes down up to Nama. So these are the 15 fences in which the Jiva actually operates in the material world. So in this 15, which is the most important among the 15? Which is it that is the most important that directs what the Jiva does? Who is going to take that on? Is the Jiva
Breathing.
Prana.
Prana. Okay, prana, of course, it has to be alive. So let's forget about 16. 15.
Ahankara.
Ahankara. Okay, thank you, Pratibha ji.
Sorry, what is the question?
Among the 15 fences, which is the most difficult fence for the Jiva to get rid of?
Manaha?
I think it is Nama.
Okay, fine. So I think the clue was within the verse in Prashna itself, because it was in descending order for a particular reason. Shraddha. Okay, Shraddham is the innermost fence, and it is the most difficult fence. Once you believe in something and it has gone, and remember Krishna has said that in Gita, right? And if it is there in the Indriyas, it's fine. If it goes into the mind, it is still difficult. But when it goes into your buddhi, it is so difficult to get rid of it. So don't let any ignorance or false notions get into your buddhi. Just remove it away from the view of the indriyas. Just take it away is what Krishna has said. That Shraddha of the deep belief that what we believe is always the right thing, because of our ignorance, is a very difficult fence to remove. So that was just a slightly out of context quiz, but anyway, I thought that will wake you up. So coming back to the Shodasha Kalaha, so he has said your body, how food, water, and the tejas aspect of food that you eat, and it influences various subtle aspects. Now Uddalaka says, to illustrate that, let us take Shodasha Kala Purushaha concept. So what does he say? My dear Shvetaketu, Pancha Dashani Mashi. So he says, go and fast for 15 days. Pancha Dasha. Pancha Dasha, 15. Ahani Mashi. Okay. Ma Ashihi. Okay. So what does it mean? He says, go and fast for 15 days. Now here is the importance. Why did he say 15 days? He could have said, go and fast for 7 days, go and fast for 10 days, or go and fast for 21 days. Or like Mahatma Gandhi, go and fast for how many, I don't know how many days Mahatma Gandhi fasted in various aspects in his life, but that was certainly more than 15 days. Okay. But he asked him to go and fast for 15 days. Why? Because of these 15 coverings of the jivas. Okay. The Shodasha Kala Purushaha, the 16th is the jiva covered by 15. Now to illustrate a concept with a human experiment, he said, go and fast for 15 days. But then he said, Kamam Apaha Piba. Drink as much water as you want, Gandhi style. Drink as much water as you want, but Panchadashi Mashihi. Don't eat anything for 15 days. Okay. And then he said, if you do that, Prano no apipatet, vichetsata iti, which means that if you just drink and don't eat for 15 days, don't worry, you're not going to die. You will be alive. Go and do that. So our Shvetaketu then fasts for 15 days and then he comes back to his dad. Saha panchadashahani nashata hi enam upasasada. Kim bravimi bho iti ruchaha somya ejumshi samani iti. So his dad said, okay, friend, okay, my son, you come here. I'm very pleased that you come back alive and you're quite alert and you're fasted for 15 days. Okay, so now can you do me a favor? Okay, fine. What is it, Dad? He said, can you recite Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, and Samaveda? Can you recite these three Vedas? Is what the son asked, the dad asked his son. So here I want to pause a couple of minutes as a quiz. Why did Uddalaka only pick Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, and Samaveda? He seems to have forgotten Atharvana Veda or Atharva Veda or Atharvana Veda. He seems to have forgotten that branch of Vedas. Why has he taken only these three? Richaha, Yajumshi, and Samani. Any takers on that? Shushruth.
It was done later on, so it wasn't actually, because this is part of Samaveda. So Atharvana Veda is more recent, so it was not like collected properly by that stage.
Okay, thank you very much. That's an interesting angle to it. Anybody else?
Because it's the same as, it is the same content is the same as the three other Vedas.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, could it be because we are talking of prose, poetry, and song?
Well done. Deval, yes, you get full marks. Shushruth also gets full marks. You get a distinction. Shushruth gets a high 2-1. So well done. Yeah. So I think it's Deval's point is very clear. So Uddalaka is a very, these are all the things that we need to watch and makes reading Upanishads much more interesting. He gives three because all form of human communication is only in three forms. There is no other form outside this. Gadya, Padya, and Gana. Poetry, prose, and music. So he says, do this. Can you actually now recite this? Do Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, and Samaveda. Okay. Sahovacha navai ma pratibhanti bhoiti. So Shvetaketu said, dear dad, nothing is coming to me. It is not coming to me. Although I feel I'm alert, I'm not able to recite this. It is just not coming to me, to my mind. I'm not able to recollect it from my memory. Okay. So Uddalaka then goes and says, look, see, 15 days you've fasted, you've drunk all the water, but still you're not able to recollect what is there in your memory. That is the subtle aspect of your mind. You're not able to recollect and you're not able to say the Vedas. Okay. You know how this is? This is very similar to Uddalaka gives another example. And he says, okay, let us not go deep into this verse because we may be running out of time. But I will just take a few interesting verses here. Eko angaraha khadyotamatraha. So basically what he says is, you know what, there is a big, maybe an Agni Kunda or a campfire that is there and the fire is burning a lot. And then, and the fire, what happens over several days, it spontaneously goes away. And say after 3 or 4 days after a campfire, you might be just left with one stick, angaraha, eko angaraha, which means one Agni. Yeah, one coal that is hot. That may just be what is left. After say 15 days, this fire has burned, but you have not fueled it. It has just been burning, and then after 15 days, all that is left is just eko angaraha, which means this jiva fellow is just alive with his body. Okay, there is only eko angaraha. How is this eko angaraha? Khadyota matraha. Khadyota means firefly. Okay, so I just hope you enjoy this, the way in which he brings the metaphors and similes and illustration to bring in a concept. And he says, this one Agni, one coal, one clod of coal that is red hot is like a firefly. And I've given you a picture of firefly, Khadyota matraha. And then he says, with this one kunda, now on this kunda, if you put lots of wood on it, or you pour a lot of ghee onto it, will it catch fire? No. If anything, whatever that small fire is there, that will go away. Yeah. So like that is what has happened to your body, because for 15 days, you have not fueled your body with annam. You're not fueled your body with food. Because of that, your body doesn't have the fuel. And as I told you, the subtle aspect of what you eat goes to your mind, and then it energizes the mind to do stuff. Because you're fasted, your mind is not working properly, and because of that, all the things that is there in your memory shell is not being brought forwards, and that is the reason why you are not able to recite the Vedas. Okay, so this is a practical example in which he gives, and he just picks up annam and illustrates how the food influences the mind. Okay, I hope you find that interesting, because then what he goes on to say in this particular verse is, he goes on to say, now you take that fire, then I told you before, if you put a lot of wood on it, it'll never catch that fire, because you had only one small, small stick with fire that was left after 15 days of burning. Now, if I throw in all the wood on it, it is not going to light. But what I can do is, if I take a small piece of grass, a dry grass, I take a small piece of grass or a small piece of paper, and then I increase the fire in that. And then as the fire increases, I add more. And then eventually it comes back to where it was. Okay. So why he says this is, he says, now you're not able to go, now you're not able to recite the Vedas because you're fasted for 15 days. But now go and eat whatever you want. Okay. Eat well and then come back. So he eats and then comes back. And now his father tells him, now recite Rig, Yajus, and Samaveda. And then this fellow will recite everything very well. Okay. And then you say, look what happened to your body. Now you ate annam, and then the subtle part of that got to your mind, and then that energized and refreshed your mind and your memory shell. And now from the memory shell, all the things that you've got, you're now able to recollect, and you're able to recite the Vedas. This is very similar to what now you can do after 15 days of this fire that has gone out. You take a piece of grass, a dry grass, light it up, then you put in more wood into it, then you light it up, then you light it in such a way that eventually you get the full fire. Okay, this is exactly how your body operates. And Uddalaka gives this example just to take annam as an example and say what happens to the annam. And this is a very practical example, and we all know this. When we are hungry, we just can't recollect things properly, and we become very irritable, and we just can't do highly skilled tasks. We really have to fuel our body again to remind us. So next time when this happens at our work, when this happens, remember what Uddalaka has said, that the subtle part of the food that influences the mind, and how correct our Uddalaka was when he took up a practical example to illustrate a deep philosophy of how the processing of food is not under your control. When all that you do is use your hands and throw it in, but what happens inside is completely out of your control. Tejas, Aap, and Annam are actually helping you run your affairs of life. So that is the overarching message that comes from the seventh Khanda. Okay, and I want to finish today with the most inspiring aspect of what Chandogya, of what Uddalaka takes up next, because he's spoken so much about the body and how the body is kind of totally dependent, and we are nobody in that. So at that point, what our Shvetaketu said, yeah, I understand everything now as to how the stages Aap and Annam are very important in the affairs of Brahmanda and Pindanda. And at that point, Uddalaka, then he says, you know what, there is still a little bit more to discuss here. And he goes to this states of consciousness of the jivas, about what happens to the consciousness of the jivas in their samsara state. And we are all again experts on that. We have done a whole series on Mandukya Upanishad. What Uddalaka takes is takes a few concepts around the conscious states of the jivas, and then he gives a definition of what is the deep sleep. And he will take the deep sleep and then inform us that how the jiva is dependent, in all states of its consciousness. We may not be aware of it, but still it is dependent on all. It is in a dependent state in all states of consciousness. Okay, and then he will pick up one particular aspect, Shushupti, and illustrate that first, and then he will go to the waking state and he will illustrate again the utter helplessness of the jivas, and then he will go into giving further illustrations into the 9 famous examples of Chandogya Upanishad chapter 6. So that is how we are going to make progress next week. I think we are running out of time here. I don't have time to deal with this beautiful 2 verses, but I think we should deal with it next week in all its glory. And also what I would advise is for all of us to go back and try and do some revision on Mandukya Upanishad, because that becomes very relevant in the next section of what Uddalaka is going to be talking to us. Okay. So the summary of all that I've spoken right now so far is Uddalaka starts with an argument that there is no reason why his son should feel egoistic, because he is nobody. Why he is a nobody? He was not there before creation. He did not create anything, and that the creator created the universe. And when the creator created the universe, the initial entities that came about under his guidance then create the rest of the universe, not only Brahmanda, but also Pindanda. And it is a constant question that reminds Shvetaketu that there is no reason for him to be egoistic. Okay, so that is the key contextual relevance of this. And that is the next step is look at your states of consciousness in waking state, dream state, dreamless sleep. Look at your own state of affairs there. How can you claim that you are independent and an egoistic person? That becomes very important. And that actually is the preamble to the 9 famous examples that Uddalaka gives Shvetaketu. So this argument there is, you cannot give all these examples of dependence and then finally say, you know what, Shvetaketu, actually you are God yourself. Okay? That is utter stupidity and unsound philosophy to say you are God himself. How is that possible when he has spoken so much about dependence of the jiva on Brahman? He can't suddenly say you are Brahman yourself. That just does not fit in. And that is how Uddalaka's language is going to be, and Uddalaka's philosophy is. And again, that is important when you study the Upanishads, that you should study the Upanishad in its entirety, and in its context. And once we understand that, then we realize that we are totally dependent on the Supreme Being. And for our liberation, it is that realization of our dependence that ultimately realizes in devotional service that will prompt him to give us our emancipation. So that is the final philosophy that Uddalaka is going to come later. But next week, we are going to talk about the states of consciousness of the jivas. And I would urge you to do some revisions on Mandukya Upanishad. Perhaps maybe we will take up 10 to 15 minutes revision of Mandukya before we go to this section of Chandogya Upanishad. So with that note, I'm going to conclude today's session. Krishna Pranamastu. Thank you very much for listening, and any questions is welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Madhu. I mean, I want to ask you, do you want this section recorded now, or shall I stop the recording? It might help you to, or...
Yeah, you can stop recording. A Q&A is good, Sudarshan.
Good, no, that's fine. No, it's no problem from my side. But because in future, when you upload into the YouTube, it's you're the one who delete this,
Yeah. So we do some initial editing. Yeah, you can stop at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. No worries.